Now, if you're somebody who has purchased a Leatherman in the last 10 years, you probably have encountered these proprietary screws that are present on a lot of the multi-tools. Now, if you wanted to tune them, there's very few options in which you can do so. And today I'm going to talk to you about these little wrenches right here. Now, these are from Russia. I've been talking about them in the past, and I'm actually going to be putting them up on Etsy today. But before I do that, I thought I'd go ahead and unbox this rebar, and we'd also tune up two additional tools. We're going to tune up the ST300 as well as the Charge Plus, all of which use these types of screws. So if you're interested in how to use these properly and also how to tune these, this is your video. So let's get to it. All right, so first off, outside of locking wrenches, how the heck are you going to tune these up? Well, we're going to use some specialty tools that are made by a gentleman in Russia. Now, I have purchased 20 sets of these to be sold on Etsy. Now, they would normally take about a month and a half, but we will be making them available tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And what you will get is you will get 2 wrenches as well as 2 Security Torx wrenches as well. This will cover the majority of Leatherman tools and allow you to tune them up. These implements are also small enough to fit inside most sheaths from Leatherman and from other makers. So I really like that, and we'll be talking a little bit more about them. But for this video, we'll be utilizing these and showing you how to use them properly and keep yourself from scratching the frame as well. There's a couple little tips and tricks that I want to emphasize, so we'll be talking about that. So for starters, let's go ahead and unbox this rebar, and then we'll go from there. So I want to show you guys that I am in fact not messing with it. Alright, that's it. Get that out of there. Now let's go ahead and check it to see how it is right out of the box. Actually, these are some of the nicest pliers. I mean, they're really smooth right out of the box. But you know what? They have that problem. When I squeezed it, it immediately tightened up again. So real quick, let's take a detour and fix these pliers. All right, so we have our little fixer tool thingy. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the pliers, we're gonna put it around this piece of wood, and I'm gonna twist laterally as I squeeze. That will get it loose again, as you can see, but squeeze, tightened up a little bit, so we'll keep doing that. You'll know whether it has this problem because you'll squeeze it and it will tighten up on you, and then you will have to be able to fix it with something like this. There's a little bit more we'll need to do. I'll just rush through that real quick and then we'll go from there. Okay, so that is a little bit better. It's not perfect, but it's getting there. Now, normally what I would do is I would actually probably grab a small copper rod about the same diameter as the inside of the gripper part, and then I would use that and twist around it because it pulls these two ends together as tight as possible while I'm twisting. So these will get bent both directions, and that will work inside the pivot and loosen it up. Now this isn't bad, but it could be a little bit better, and that's how you fix it. So let's move on from there real quick and get to the tuning of the actual pivots themselves. Okay, so we went ahead and loosened the plier head a little bit. It's much better than it was. Now we're going to go ahead and inspect the inside of the frame. Now I did this a little bit off camera, and I can tell you that the Phillips side is far too tight. So we're going to end up loosening the screw just a little bit to allow us to get better access to these internal implements. Now, the way this system works, if you look on the frame of the rebar, one side has flattened edges opposite each other and the other side is round. Now the side with the blade cut out is the side with the lock. And the way it comes is the pivot goes through the freely rotating side and then gets locked into the frame on the opposite side. What that does is when they line up all the implements and they set the pivot through it, they'll then rotate that pivot until it eventually locks into place. That's how they know they can get it through all of the washers and so on. So when we go to unlock it on the rebar, we're going to put one of our wrenches on the non-bladed side, the side without the cutout. We're going to lock that around the pivot like so, and then we are going to rest it with our hands. Now, for this particular side of the tool, it's not as important, but my experience with this Loctite is that it's very strong. So doing this will keep it from freely rotating within this piece of metal. It's not enough of an indentation to actually stop the pivot from spinning and locking itself. So it's best to use both wrenches. So you'll see that in a bit, but use both. And this will also be important technique to pinch like this, because you don't want that piece of metal to move and then potentially scratch your frame. You can put a piece of tape on there, but I have found over time that I have not needed it after I've developed some technique and just some little practice. The rebar is the single most difficult one to do this with because, as you can see, the indentation. There's a raised piece of metal around the edge that makes it a little bit more difficult for these wrenches to get in. Now, if you go like this, they'll actually set a little bit better, but for arresting it, you just want to make sure that you're pinning it as hard as you can against the pivot, and it should not rotate. On other implements like the ST300, they are fully exposed and they are not recessed in a piece of metal. This is going to make adjusting the ST300 much easier. The same thing is true for the Charge Plus or the Charge series. You're not going to have that issue because all of the screws are exposed, and it will be much, much easier. The same thing about the pivot on the rebar is true for the ST300. The locking side of the frame is always going to be where the cutout for the blade is. As you can see, this is flattened on that side and it is rounded on this side. So the pivot is going to go in through the non-bladed side and then it's going to lock in to the frame. So you want to arrest this side and unscrew this one. Now what we're going to do with these wrenches on the rebar, which is brand new, we need to loosen it a little bit. But on this one, well, you can see this has been a loved ST300. This was sent to me by a friend who's giving it to me to use for our Leatherman wave modification project. But in the meantime, let's get this thing tuned in, shall we? So this one we're going to be tightening, this one we're going to be loosening. So this side is really, really tight, and I know I need to take the wrench on the bladed side and loosen up that screw. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it like so that I have a good grip on it. I'm actually going to end up pressing on one side like so and holding it while I do the other. Now you can put this in a vise. I have found that it is easier to arrest the second wrench by holding it in your hands. You can bring it up close to your chest. Do whatever is comfortable, but try to make sure that you have a good firm grip on it, because that way you won't have to worry about scratching. And then of course the last bit of advice is with these Loki wrenches, because they are pressed to get the the orientation, one of the two sides is going to end up locking in better. So just flip it around until you find the correct side. Now that I have it set onto that screw, I'm going to hold it down really tight. I'm going to take the other one. Now there's two different sizes. One's for each of the two pivot sizes. You're going to take the smaller of the two. And then in this case, I need to go left. So I'm going to lock it in place, and I'm going to try to get it in twist. Now I can tell it was slipping, so I'm going to switch to the other side, and that is a better grip. Now I can feel this is actually quite tight. All right, so briefly trying this out, it appears that this may be the most difficult pivot that I've ever dealt with. In fact, I've never had one be this tight before. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm actually going to use a separate technique that's going to require me to bring in here a heat gun. We're going to take a heat gun and we're going to actually loosen the Loctite enough for me to actually create some space. So let's go ahead and put some gloves on, and we'll go ahead and loosen this thing up. The nice part is that a heat gun is going to be better than a torch, because we're not going to heat up the metal past the point where it loses its tempering. Instead, it'll just go ahead and it will loosen it up. So let's go ahead and get that done. So for this, we're going to go ahead and use it only on the one side. Now after we've done that, we're going to go ahead and set up the wrenches again. It's a little bit harder with gloves, obviously. And then we are going to set it up, pinch it, and go the right way. And now it is loosening. Thankfully, which is awesome. So pinch it and then twist, and that's going to loosen up the pivot. That should be all we need to get this thing where it needs to be. Oh, much better. Much better. Of course, it's hot. Now, it may even be a little bit too loose, but it does illustrate the point, is that you can, in fact, loosen it with these wrenches. The one thing you may have to do is to heat up the screw slightly so that you can actually loosen that Loctite. You can do this not just with a heat gun, you can actually do it with a candle. So just make sure you're high enough above the heat, let it heat slowly. You're not trying to ruin the temper or get it too hot. So just take your time with it and you will eventually get it loosened. So we're actually going to tighten this up just a little bit more. Once again, you position the threading. This is going to be the toughest one that we try, for sure. I think it's still a little too hot to touch with my bare hands. Holy moly. And then we're going to actually tighten this. All right, and I'm basically, you can see I'm pinching it and then tightening. That looks pretty good, actually. Oops. Tight enough. Still quite warm to the touch, but that'll work. And now I have it loose enough that I can actually get all the implements out. So that actually worked quite well. So a little bit of heat makes it a lot easier. That was probably the most difficult of all of the multi-tools to adjust. The recessed screws, because of the way they're set, makes them particularly difficult to do. That's also going to be true on the Leatherman Bond as well. They're having those kind of tapered recessed screws, yeah, you're going to struggle. These are no problem, and you're just going to, I'll talk about that in just a minute. But let's go ahead and illustrate all of this on the ST 300. So let's just quickly check the implements. The implements, I'm pretty happy with the tension. I'm going to end up taking all of this apart. Let's focus instead on the plier heads. Now the ST 300 actually has no spring behind it. See that it's completely connected to the frame. So what happens over time is that the plier head will actually wear down, and the frame will no longer lock in as well as it used to. You can see this doesn't lock nearly as good. So there's two things I have to do here. The first one is that I have to tighten up the pivot a little bit because it's clearly too loose. The second thing I might have to do is actually peen the back of the frame so that it actually comes properly in contact with the plier head. So let's start with just going ahead and tightening this. So this is pretty straightforward, but there's a trick to it. I can never quite fully remember which side the screw is on, but the important thing isn't that. The important thing is knowing what direction you're twisting and where to put the locking, the non-moving wrench. So we're using the wider sides, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to lock it in place. Now, because I am going to the right, I'm actually going to set it up so that it actually comes in contact with the other screw, like so. Because what's going to happen is by me twisting it to the right, I'm going to be pushing this down. It's going to want to go that direction. So in this way, it keeps it from twisting. So tightening this up, we're going to go ahead and lock it in. Oops, wrong wrench. And the nice part is that this is going to be nice and exposed, so you're going to get a full connection. Tighten it up. Easy as that. See, look at the difference. It's almost too tight, but we're going to leave it just like that. And the same thing with this one. This one's very loose. So the side that we're going to arrest, the difference is this time we're actually going to put it right here, and it's going to we're going to let the frame arrest it, and we're going to push really hard to keep it from sliding. Now we're going to, once again, we're going to tighten to the right, like so. That's it. In fact, I don't think we need to peen it. That was really all it needed. So now this is back to working functionality. Perfectly fine. There you go. Now, the charge. The charge, once again, is quite simple. We have the same basic setup as the ST 300 when it comes to tension. You can do the exact same thing. And obviously, if you wanted to disassemble the tool, you can do that. I'm not going to be showing it in this video, but I hope this was helpful in demonstrating how to use the wrenches properly. If you have taken your thing completely apart and you put it back together, don't use red Loctite, use blue Loctite. It will still function very well, but allow you to tune it in the future. That's my only recommendation. All right, so the only other thing is these wrenches. Now I've tested them and they're really nicely hardened, which is very good because they have not deformed on me in any of my testing, and I'm really happy about that. These are things you can use for the wave, the surge, and the charge TTI. Okay, so they work to basically adjust all of those implements. They are not replacements for full-sized tools or bits, but they are great backups. They are going to come with a set of these wrenches, which will be going up on Etsy once again, 8 p.m. today. And the total price for all of this will be $25, including the shipping. Okay, and that is in the continental US. I will not be shipping outside the US for this particular order. If you are outside the US, if you are in Europe or otherwise, I will put a link down in the description directly to the maker of these wrenches. He has listings on eBay where you can buy these or other varieties of these wrenches directly from him. All right, really quick, I just want to reiterate on shipping relating to these wrenches with the kits. I will ship it to Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, or anywhere else that I can ship flat rate priority with the normal costs. I will ship to those individuals. That's the US territories and so on. Also, people might be wondering what happened to the viewer-sponsored video where we talk about things to be put inside the Leatherman Wave. That's coming. I'm just waiting on supplies. You had so many good ideas. I have beeswax and magnets and paper clips and you name it. It's going to be a really fun time. Now that video should be coming, with any luck, Wednesday, just before Thanksgiving at 2 p.m. Fingers crossed that everything comes in time for me to be able to make that video and get it out for you guys. And that should be one of, if not the last video before the following week. So thank you guys again for coming in and checking this out. These once again, these wrenches, along with the T10 security torques, they will come in a kit together. These are going to go up on Etsy at 8 p.m. today, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.